Welcome, listeners, to today's episode of the Black Business Roundtable. I am your host, Doug Blackshear, broadcasting to you live from the City of Diversity, Oakland, California. I will give a brief tribute to my father, Artis Blackshear, that passed away, but is still strong, is a still strong light in my life today. And he is one of the big reasons for this great show you're going to see today, too. Today, we talk to our resident social justice attorney regarding the police department and her take on improving the department for the community. And that will be Janani Ramachandran. Now, she gave me a call a little while ago and said that she might be running late again. She's really been doing a lot of moving around. She's moving from one part of Oakland to another. So we hope to see her. And if not, we have other attorneys on standby ready to light it up. Today, last but not least, another disheartening story of driving while black. And for those of you non-black people, that's called DWB, driving while black. And what we will all can do to help this story gain national reach. National reach. A special thanks to our sponsor, Magnolia Engineering and Construction, for their continued support, and we congratulate Miss Tammy Willis on her continued success in the industry accomplishment for Magnolia Engineering and Construction. The website is magnoliaengineeringandconstruction.com. Today's show highlight the role of fathers in our community, lessons taught, and in some cases, what it is like to lose a parent, especially if there was a good relationship. This show is dedicated to fathers, including my dad, that passed away October 2014. His name is Artis Blackshear. Now, he only named me Art Blackshear because he always told me, Doug, you'll only be half of me, so you can only take half that first name. That's why he didn't put the IS on the end. So I'm Art, and he's Artis. I'm still working to earn that other IS part. So as of right now, I'm just an Art, and he is an artist. We also will take a we also will talk about driving while black, which many fathers share a common experience of being pulled over and stopped, and often for no good reason other than driving while black. DWB. Dr. Ashley, I'm going to go off script for a minute because even when I think about this, look at my forehead. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to say some words of wisdom here because I'm starting to perspire when I'm looking behind me now. I'm sitting in the chair. Damn, are the police behind me? Mm-hmm. That is a problem. Mm-hmm. That is an issue. For I guarantee you 90 to 99.9% of black men and women in America being worried about being pulled over for no good reason, just driving while black. DWB. And just for the white people who don't understand that, talk to a black person about that. Any black person, they'll tell you what it is and how it feels. Our guests today include weekly check-in with Dr. Ashley Coleman, Department Chair, Assistant Professor of Psychology at University of the West. Welcome, Dr. Ashley.
Thank you, Doug. Happy to be here as always.
Well, let me just say that every time, once again, and it's been a real challenging week, especially with this great story we have ahead of it. Mm-hmm. I was telling you about a gentleman who I talked to regarding who was going through something for 2.5 years, and I believe you're going to get a chance to meet him today. Our people, and I say this at every show, just like you have a broken leg, just like you have a cavity in your tooth, you would go see a dentist. For a broken leg, you would go see a doctor.
Mhm.
When you have a hurt or broken mind, go see a psychiatrist, a doctor in psychology. Dr. Ashley, once again, welcome to the show and
Thank you.
welcome to everything you bring to this show to make me a better man and sharing with our audience how it's not being uh, demasculating by talking to someone who can help you to be a better person. Robert L. Harris, here to give us a better understanding of qualified immunity for police, community restoration, justice program, and environmental justice. I don't think he's on yet, but he's going to also be talking with me about my dad. And let me give you a little background with Mr. Bob Harris, Robert Harris, aka Uncle Robert. As all of our listeners know who watch the show, he's the main reason why I am not somewhere where I shouldn't be, first off. And then, second, he and my father were like brothers. And when my dad passed away, he had pancreatic cancer. Mr. Robert L. Harris, Uncle Robert, he came to the house every day the last 3 months of my dad's life and sat by his bed and was there. And he has no idea how humbled I am. And my dad said a couple of times, "Man, ain't you got something to do?" And Uncle Robert looked at him and said, "No," and kept reading his paper. So we're going to welcome Mr. Harris, aka Uncle Robert, on shortly. Robert L. Harris, Esquire, retired Vice President of PG&E of Oakland, California. He retired on January 1st, 2007, as Vice President of Environmental, Health, Safety, Technical, and Land Services after 34 years of service with the company. He is the recipient of a number of prestigious awards and long active in Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. He served as the fraternity's 27th Grand Pole Mark national president from 1991 to 1995. Now, on the national political highlights, Val Deming is running for 2022 Florida seat Senate. She is the former Orlando police chief seeking to unseat little Marco Rubio. Little Marco, pack your little bags, put your little tennis shoes on, and scurry on up out of there so Val Deming can clean up that mess that you caused down there in Florida. Florida, as he continues to fail Floridians at every turn. Be sure to register to vote. Let's flip this seat and let Val Deming, former police chief, escort him right back home. I wish he could have escorted him to jail. all that ruckus he caused down there in Florida. Val Deming, former police chief, Val Deming's 2022 Senate seat. Her tagline is "Never Tire." Election date, November 8th, 2022. And now for the news of the day, Dr. Ashley, please take it away.
Thank you, Doug. And so, on this day in 1982, for our older listeners, you may remember that then President Ronald Reagan announced plans to enact a $200 million plan to fight the war on drugs. His task force included 1,200 additional prosecutors and an estimated cost, again, of $200 million annually, further fueling mass incarceration, particularly in targeted Black communities. This war on drugs, again, was built on the actions of President Nixon, who announced the drug war in 1971. And during his 2 terms as president, Reagan tripled the federal drug law enforcement budget, hiring over 4,000 additional prosecutors. He also tripled the number of drug cases prosecuted and doubled conviction rates for drug crimes. He supported death sentences for individuals convicted of drug crimes and conscripted the U.S. military in support of drug prosecutions. In a speech, he dehumanized individuals with addiction problems, stating that they were parasites. This is in a 1988 speech. Parasites, vermin who peddle toxins in the government subsidized housing. What's interesting, as we know, and we can, look ahead almost 40 years later, substance use is not that of African Americans. In fact, we're hearing empathic calls for rehabilitation programs. And as the face of drugs, we're now looking at crystal methamphetamine use, particularly in the northeastern United States, of white teenagers. When I look around my neighborhood, I'm in Southern California now, but I see the effects of heroin. We know that's happening in San Francisco. So now, as the faces have changed, we're seeing more programming geared toward prevention and calls for actually, again, looking at rehabilitation. It's amazing what empathy can do, right? Again, this is courtesy of the Equal Justice Initiative. Please continue to support them and hear more news of the day. Oh, you're on mute, Doug. Our favorite words of the pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Ashley. As you all can tell, if she doesn't keep me pointed right, I'll go left. So thank you, Dr. Ashley. And once again, next up, our weekly check-in with our very own Dr. Ashley Coleman, Doctor of Psychology. Dr. Ashley, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. So, greetings to our listeners and to our guests who will be speaking in a few minutes. I want to first acknowledge, Doug, your father, and the anniversary of his passing. I'd also like to honor the legacy of my uncle, Dr. Samuel Metters, who we lost, my family's patriarch, who we lost in the last week. And in that, I want to talk about, as well as mental health conditions that impact Black and Brown communities. Specifically, though, I want to focus on the men. So for our women listeners, female listeners, please allow me to talk a little bit about to our brothers about the importance of mental health support and that it is a sign of strength. First, with grief, we understand that losing an important loved one to us shatters our world, and it can be a very isolating experience because depending on the person you lose, your world stops, but the world around you keeps going. And it can feel as though you're on pause and that no one fully understands. And that's true and untrue at the same time. Um, Usually the loved one has many people in their life, personally, professionally, people that they impacted, but missing someone, there is a grieving process. And that process can look like isolation. It can look like frustration, irritability. It can look like one day not wanting to get out of bed or wanting to fill the schedule with tasks to distract oneself. More importantly, grief looks different on everyone. And it is a process that also can push people away. People want to feel helpful sometimes, or you may see someone going through grief and not know what to say. I like to say sometimes the best thing you can do is gift someone with your presence, whether that's just a text message, a phone call, dropping in with, and now, we definitely want to give someone a warning. with COVID protocols, but dropping something at the doorstep. I thought about you. I want to make things easier for you and my family. We get to cooking and dropping things off. That's our love language. But I wanted to start with depression because it can look differently for men. And that's going to lead also into my brief comments about post-traumatic stress disorder, where I would like to focus my discussion. But for women, we think sadness, and that may or may not involve tearfulness, that may or may not involve sleep changes, appetite changes, a sense of restlessness, or a sense of heaviness. And whether or not the depression has been caused by bereavement, even in cases of bereavement, it is not uncommon to have thoughts or fantasies of wanting to go and be with loved ones. So it's important to surround yourself and find your reason to continue on, especially when that loss is foundational or unexpected. Again, for men, depression can look like irritability. It can also look like coping that we see for other types of mental conditions. That can be gambling, that can be wanting to go to the gym and just work out, wanting to engage in sex, not taking care of oneself. It depends. But what I want to really drive home is that people cope the best way they can. And one of the ways that you can find out more about what's going on with the loved one or the man in your life is to ask. Now, I'm a therapist, so I'm trained at asking questions many different ways and never just once. So this is not a one and done using my sports analogies. No, no, no. Sometimes it's the gift of presence, of asking, baby, are you okay? People, I'm fine. Okay. I'm fine doesn't mean they're fine. Just means, okay, you have to dictate that, understand that tone, and figure out, that next strategy. Um, you know, you don't seem like yourself. There are other ways to address it depending on how you know the person. I'm noticing you don't seem like yourself. This is hard. Sometimes too, just opening the door and validating this hurts. This is hard. We're going to get through this together. So instilling hope. And then I like to, similar to when I work with adolescents, not calling men teens, again, don't at me, don't throw tomatoes, but it's about actually keeping your ears open to those when the door cracks and we're allowed an entry point where someone seems like they're ready to talk just a little bit. Just say, I'm here. Don't say anything. Lean in. Try not to interrupt and just be present. Right. So, those are the comments I want to say just about depression. But I want to also present I'm going to be very honest, some startling statistics about African American men, post traumatic stress disorder, and risk for suicide. And I really, as I'm saying this, my stomach is tight, but I really want to share this because I really believe that we've been through a pandemic. We're 18 months into something that we were told would be over in 6 weeks, on top of whatever else we've been surviving. It's been tough. And, everyone is doing the best they can to make it through the day. And so now's a great time, again, to check in with oneself so we can reduce silent suffering, right? Or making other people around us feel like they're suffering in silence. So last week, Doug and I talked about post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a mental health condition that we diagnose using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And that Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, it's in its fifth edition. It's only supposed to be used by trained clinicians. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, was actually coined thinking of use with military personnel who witnessed death consistently at war. But now we understand that someone can be vulnerable to develop post-traumatic stress disorder by virtue of surviving something life-threatening in and of themselves, or even hearing or witnessing someone else survive something life threatening or lose their life. So we know that first responders, nurses, doctors, firefighters, police officers, psychologists, even teachers, and just living in certain environments can make us more vulnerable for developing PTSD. Having our life or threat of violence, racial trauma, intergenerational historical trauma can make us even have higher likelihood of developing post-traumatic stress disorder. So what does that look like? That can look like flashbacks, a sense of hypervigilance. Um, Unfortunately, last week someone tried to enter my car at a red light, and I keep my doors locked because being from Oakland, like we say, I'm always ready for go mode. Well, that's hypervigilance, right? Um, Growing up with a father who never sat with his back to the door, and I understand that. That can also look like nightmares, racing hearts, racing thoughts, sleep disturbance, issues with concentration. And if someone has two of those symptoms after experiencing a life threatening event or hearing about one or witnessing a racial killing on television, which is why anytime they show George Floyd, I only need to see something one time. And even then, I still scan to see if I need to see it, right? But experiencing two of those symptoms within a 1 month period can make, in addition to other criteria of it impacting one's life, can make someone actually meet criteria for a diagnosis of PTSD. Again, this is important for someone to be diagnosed by a trained professional. But in addition to that, with PTSD, for some people, that it's not the immediate onset. For some people, they can go through something and it doesn't hit them until like 6 months later. So we call that a delayed onset. Okay. When we go through trauma, we can have a variety of responses. We can have fight, we can have flight, we can have freeze, and in some instances, as we understand, when people can be hyper vigilant and have weapons, we understand that freezing can save our lives. It's about surviving the moment. Okay, so I just want to say that freezing sometimes gets a bad rap where people feel as though freezing means you've punked out, you didn't stand up. No, 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 no. When we're talking about trauma, we're also talking about survival. So it's, and maybe we're used to fighting, maybe we're used to fleeing, maybe freeze, but there are a variety of responses we can have, and it's important to have them in our toolkit. Okay, there can also be freak out, right? So there are and then there can also be this fawning experience where some people just give in and try to please others to get out of situations. We see that with sexual assault survivors. I just want to put that on the table. Now for statistics specific to Black men. So I want to thank Division 56, which is the Trauma Psychology Division and the American Psychological Association. Dr. Yasmin Yamas and her associates wrote a paper stating that 76.3% of African Americans may have at least one experience in their lifetime of exposure to any trauma. 76%. Okay. That African American boys between the ages of 5 and 12 are more likely to die by suicide than any other age group. That is 2 times higher than white children of the same age group. I'm going to say that again. We're talking about African American boys between the ages of 5 and 12. So, for our parents listening, I know I'm also integrating statistics about adults, but it's also important, as we've been talking about weekly, checking in with your child, what's going on at school, is there bullying, what is happening, just making sure, checking about your child's well-being. In addition to, and that was a study done by the Missouri State Public Health Lab. And also other responses to trauma can include anger, fear, greater aggression, and finally with historical trauma, right? So we're talking about that with our historical talk about Reagan and the war on drugs, and we're still dealing with the consequences of the crack epidemic, right? When we talk about other historical types of trauma, here we are. Um, this can lead to and impact 62.7% African Americans being the leading group. So we are resilient people, but wow, the impact on our cardiovascular systems, the way we cope, we have to frame it. So the way we can look at substance use empathically is, why would someone want to numb? Why would someone want to nod off? Why would someone want to drink their problems away? And so, for myself and other mental health clinicians, our job is to teach, is to validate people's trauma, teach them to heal from it, and then introduce healthier coping mechanisms so that they can not need the substance use. So, just wanted to share those reflections. Keep thriving, keep going. And if you recognize yourself or a man you love experiencing some of these symptoms, please reach out for support. There is a mantra that's being said that says, I'd rather listen to your story than hear about your death, in this case, suicide. And also for the Black men that are striving at work, there's also a recent quote that says, for some Black men, they feel that the solution to trauma is wealth. And I want to tell you, Black man, you are a whole person first, and what you produce and provide comes second. Thank you.
Dr. Ashley once again, and I'll continue. We could just record this. I got my stress stick. Hold on, right here. I got my stress stick right here. I got my doctor right there. I'm ready. Let's get on with the show. Thank you, Dr. Ashley.
Thank you.
A moment in time dedicated to my father and all those in our audience that have lost fathers as well. I just want to take time today to remember someone that was a great importance in my life. Artis, my father. My dad from the beginning was no ordinary man, as he stood head and shoulders above just about anybody in the room. My dad was 6'5", approximately 260 pounds, made a height tower over most. Let me tell you a little bit about my dad, Artis. With the help of someone that knew him very well and previously was on the Black Business Roundtable. Our special guest, Mr. Robert Harris, whom I also call, hey, Unc, how you doing today?
Doing fine, thank you.
As you know, and as you were there, and you played a very important role with helping me heal, because as I was very blessed to have a father who was not only my dad, he was my business partner, and he was my best friend. So I lost 3 people in 2014 on October the 14th. And some of the stories he used to tell me about never give up, always help other people, do your best, whether you're the janitor, be the best janitor. And I think I heard that, Mr. Harris. That sounds familiar. But the reason why I asked Uncle Robert to come on today, I'd like to have you share some of the stories that you can remember. And let me be clear, audience. I didn't lose my father. I lost my dad. I lost my best friend. And he and I owned a construction company together. So it was 3 people in one. Uncle Robert, before I start bawling here, can you help me out? I want to grab some tissue.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I can help you out because I knew your father before you knew your father. First, let me say to Dr. Ashley how proud I am of your recently deceased uncle,
Thank you.
Sam Metters, who was very, very dear to me. I knew him for over 50 years, and he was an extraordinary man. And I'm certainly sorry for your loss. Douglas, back to your father. Uh, when I came to California in 1960, I attempted to enroll at Oakland Technical High School in the 12th grade. And when I talked to the counselor about enrolling, she told me that I had come from, and correctly so, a rural segregated high school, and that I would not be able to compete with the students at Oakland Tech. That is what she told me. In essence, that I did not have the tools necessary to compete in the college prep courses that I was attempting to get enrolled in. Now, my sister, your mother, Jean, when I went back home the next that evening and told her that I could not get enrolled in college prep courses, well, she said, Artis and Douglas, you're correct. Artis stood 6'5", 250 pounds. Jean said, Artis, your mission is clear. And Artis said, I know what my mission is to get you enrolled in whatever courses you want to get enrolled at Oakland Technical High School. And this was in 1960, many years ago. The next day, I showed up at Oakland Technical High School, accompanied by this handsome 6'5", 250-pound person. Probably the first time that this counselor, Mrs. Hillegas, had ever seen a man of that stature in her counseling room. I explained to Mrs. Hillegas that I wanted to enroll in college prep courses and that you have denied me. And today I have with me my brother-in-law who wants to talk to you about that. Artis took that as an opportunity, and I can't repeat what he said to that counselor, but he told her things that I had never heard of before. And when he finished, being from a segregated school in Arkansas, I had never seen or been in a white school before. But when he finished with her, she was so shaken that she just handed the paper over and said, look, whatever courses he wants, he can have them. Just sign them. Just fill out the papers and I'll sign it. And that was the first time I had seen a man talk that way to a white woman. And I'm very afraid, Lord, is he gonna get us both in trouble? But Artis had the passion because he knew what I wanted, and he was determined to make certain that I got enrolled in those college prep courses. And I got enrolled in them. And but for his insistence on this counselor doing the right thing, clearly I would not have been where I am today as a having gone to law school and done a lot of stuff, including president at one time of the National Bar Association, the Grand Pole Mark at one time of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and the national president of the Boule. All of those things and more was a direct result of Artis's determination to make certain that this counselor did not stop this little black boy from rural segregated Arkansas from achieving his dreams. And that's a long story, but I just wanted to make it very short because I could go on and on and on and on, but I know you have time limits. And I talk about Artis in my book called Goodbye Arkadelphia, turning obstacles into opportunities. So anyway, if you have questions, let me know. But that's a short version.
Uncle Robert, I just want to say this, and you know my dad was a man of few words, and I want to make a brief because our next guest is going to light this show up today. And actually, our next guest is directly related to the story that you told in regards to black and white in America. But when my dad passed away and we went to his funeral, I had a bunch of my friends come up to me and said, "Man, I used to go to your house all the time and talk to your dad." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, man, he talked to me about getting married, going to school. I had a friend named Andre, have a friend named Andre Cartier." He said, "Yeah, you talked to him about being a merchant seaman, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And before I'm going to close out with this because I want to talk briefly about uh, uh, one other issue. My dad, and when I grew up, he told me never, and I mean he never told me you did a good job. If I got an A, he said, "Why didn't you get an A plus?" If I won the state championship, he said, "Well, you should have won the United States championship." If I won the United States championship, he said, "Why aren't you the world champion?" And I used to keep thriving and keep pushing and keep trying to get that attaboy out of him. Well, I never got until he was diagnosed with cancer July 10th, 2014. August, sometime around August, because he passed away in October, August, September. He said, "Come here, boy." He was, cancer, pancreatic cancer was pretty much eating him up. He said, "Come here." He said, "I never told you this, but I've always been so proud of you." And just thinking about it right now kind of makes me cloud up a little bit, but I waited 53 years to hear my dad tell me, "That a boy." But it kept me pushing, kept me trying and achieving and trying to do whatever I could to get better. And I share that story so that those of you who are listening, tell your kids you did good, but you can do better. When we get complacent with mediocrity, then we become meteoric. So on that note, I'm going to close it out, but I would like to ask Mr. Harris before our guests come chime in because Janani Ramachandran, she had a family emergency that she had to attend to. But Mr. Harris, with your extensive background, vast knowledge of many, many things, there is one thing I wanted to ask you before you, and if you could stay on, we would love for you to stay on. But we had a social justice attorney regarding the police department and talking about improving the department for community policing. And the question we want to ask is this: getting pulled over by the police, what is your best recommendation for, and you knowing the law the way you know it, for a Black man or woman to survive, not get a ticket, not say, hey, officer, thank you, we'll see you at the police put picnic this year, but to survive, to live, to see another day? What advice could you give our audience, sir? Thank you.
Well, the advice is very simple. Comply. No matter what he asks you, you simply comply, and you will live, most likely, to fight another day. By not complying, you may very well end your life right away and never get the opportunity to fight on another day and in another place. So my advice strongly is comply, comply. It doesn't matter whether or not you are right, because you can be dead right. And that's the point that you have to understand. You can be dead right. So a little humility can go a long ways in keeping you alive so that you can fight another day.
You're on mute, Doug.
Now you see why I need this woman to back my play. Thank you, Dr. Ashley. Wait a minute. And I'm going to squeeze my stick a little bit too. Mr. Harris, Uncle Robert, one last thing. Qualified immunity for police. What is your opinion on that before we move on to our special next guest?
Well, qualified immunity has been around for a long time. It refers to suing a police officer or a governmental official in their official capacity or duties in a civil case. And it's a very, very hard standard to meet when you bring a civil lawsuit against a police officer, for example. That's why reforms are being suggested right now in the United States Congress to change qualified immunity so that you can bring a civil lawsuit against a police officer who violates your rights. That, in a nutshell, is a simplified way of understanding what qualified immunity is about.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris, aka Uncle Robert. And thank you for sharing that magnificent story. And audience, the story that you heard Mr. Harris talk about, my dad, Artis Blackshear, carries on with me. And after we give a sponsor break, we're going to introduce our next guest. Mr. Harris, if you have time or you can, I would love for you to hear this story, kid. It is unbelievable. Dr. Ashley, can you take it away, please?
Yes, I can. And before I do so, I just want to thank you, Mr. Harris, for your condolences for my uncle. I really appreciate you sharing that story. So we want to thank Mr. Donnie Glover of BlackUSA.News and BeMoreNews.com, and want to invite our listeners to tune in to Chap and Friends on Mondays, Party Marty Let's Talk on Tuesdays. Thank you also to our main sponsor, Magnolia Engineering and Construction, whose vision is to further the presence of Black women in the construction and engineering industry through key partnerships and building contracts in the municipal, government, and transportation sectors. And also, we want to invite our listeners, if you're interested in joining our BBRT advertising family, please contact us at bbrt2021@hotmail.com. Back to you, Doug, so you can introduce our wonderful guests.
Thank you, Dr. Ashley. Once again, every word that you utter just takes the wind out of my sail. Whew. Thank you. Okay, and as I said, I would like Mr. Robert Harris, Esquire, aka Uncle Robert, to stay with us as we listen to a disturbing story of yet another driving while Black story to tell Mr. Michael Allen Thrash of Lubbock, Texas. Now, he's not from Lubbock, Texas. He's from East Side Oakland, Oakland, California, where the Black Panthers are originally from. Also joining us is his attorney, Matthew Hawkins. Take us through your story so our audience can understand the circumstances of your case. Mr. Hawkins, thank you, sir.
Muted.
Good hearing.
Mr. Hawkins?
So we're having some trouble hearing Mr. Hawkins right now. Mr. Thrash, would you like to start telling your story while we give Mr. Hawkins some time to troubleshoot?
Okay, yes. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for having me. This story started off 2.5 years ago. I was on my way to Brenham, Texas to meet with a friend of mine and then go on to look at a truck in College Station, Texas. I was on my way to purchase a diesel truck, a big rig, and I was on my way there, and I got pulled over by the Abilene Taylor County Sheriff's Department, and they pulled me over, and the reason they say they pulled me over was for my license plate light was not bright enough, which in itself I felt was kind of a bad reason. But to make a long story short, when they pulled me over, the first thing I did when the officer walked to my passenger side window, I gave him my driver's license and my concealed handgun license. And I was carrying, I had a firearm in my pocket. I had a pair of shorts on, and I had like the carpenter type shorts where I had it in my pocket. And when I asked him why he pulled me over, and he asked me, did I want to get out and look at the license plate? I said, sure. Well, as I stepped out of the car, I noticed it was about 4 deputies standing behind my car. So I immediately put both hands in the air and I pointed down.
Mike, let me hold you up a little bit. I just talked to your attorney. I want to make sure that he gets the story and not you tell the story. So let's introduce our next guest, who is a part of this situation. It came in about 2 weeks ago. Jessica Holyday from Texas with the NAACP. How are you today, young sister?
I'm fine. How are you today?
Good. Well, Mr. Hawkins get his technical stuff together. Can we have you introduce yourself and let you say how you fit into this equation with the NAACP? And I'm gonna tell you something. I am a strong advocate of the NAACP. I have my lifetime membership, and once again, Mr. Harris, aka Uncle Robert, is one of the reasons I joined them. Join your local, state, and national NAACP.
Yes,
that's our sponsorship for the day. Go ahead, Mrs. Holyday.
Thank you. I am with the Lubbock branch of the NAACP, number 6198. I am the chair of the Legal Redress Committee, and Michael Thrash came to us a couple of weeks ago with his complaint and made us aware of this case. We are in the process of seeing what direct action we can take with the consent of his lawyer, Mr. Hawkins. Our process begins with a complaint form, and through that process, we completely vet our complainants. We go through a process. We have like a 9-step process that we go through where we investigate each complaint that is sent in. And during that process, we interview the complainant, we interview witnesses that he gives us, and we go through a complete step-by-step process. So we're in that process right now, and we're just at that point where we're trying to decide what direct action needs to be taken in this case.
Thank you very much. And we appreciate you looking out for all people down there in Texas, because I hear they have a few issues down there. Mr. Hawkins, have you? Okay. Okay. Well, I tell you what, I'm going to call you because I want to make sure, Mr. Thrash, since you have legal representation, and I know about legal representation, you don't want to talk too much. So I'm going to call Mr. Hawkins, and he's going to talk to you via telephone or talk to our audience via telephone. But the reason why I decided to work with, give me 1 second, Mr. Hawkins. The reason why I decided to, after hearing about Mr. Thrash's, Michael Thrash, and I've been knowing Michael Thrash since I was 10 years old, elementary and junior high school. And Michael, don't take this personally, but you were a very nice kid. You didn't get in any trouble. You were square. You came to school. You did what you. So when you left, I knew you were going to do great things and not get caught up in the system. And when I talked to Lorenzo Hudson at a class reunion, and he told me what happened, and I'm going to turn it over to your attorney, I felt it was my duty. I felt like Artis Blackshear, taking Mr. Harris up to the school, getting him in class. Mr. Hawkins, take it away, sir.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Got some feedback, doesn't it? Okay. So how this all got started? Y'all having feedback on your side?
Can you all hear him?
Yeah, no feedback. We can hear him.
Okay.
Yes, got some feedback. Okay, there we go. So ultimately, how this case really starts is Mr. Thrash is actually driving a friend's vehicle, and that vehicle, unbeknownst to Mr. Thrash, the owner had a prior arrest years ago for a drug charge that was ultimately dismissed. And the owner of that vehicle had no idea that she was flagged as a known drug dealer vehicle, and neither did Mr. Thrash. And so as he's traveling through Nolan County, which is Sweetwater, Texas, there's a speed limit sign or a speed limit reader that basically flags you and lets you know what your speed is at. Well, also attached to that speed limit detector is what's called an LPR, a license plate reader. And that's got a lot of feedback, guys.
Can you walk into another room? We don't have to see your face, long as we can hear your voice.
Yeah, I'm muted, but it's still is that what's causing some of mine?
That's much better.
Okay, well, let me get over here. I apologize, guys. Let me get into this room here. Okay, and ultimately, the license plate reader sends a dispatch to the Nolan County Sheriff's Department, who ends up following, dispatching the Sheriff's Department and letting them know there's a known drug dealer vehicle traveling through their county. Nolan County Sheriff's Department is dispatched, and they locate Mr. Thrash's truck that he's driving, and they follow him. And they follow him for quite some time. And they never, ever, they don't make a stop in Nolan County. And And in my opinion, and the reason why is Nolan County law enforcement, they were being honest. They could not find an actual legitimate reason to stop Mr. Thrash while traveling through their county. And so Nolan County radios ahead to Taylor County Sheriff's Department, informing them of the information received from the license plate reader. And so once Mr. Thrash crosses Nolan County line into Taylor County, the Nolan County Sheriff's back off, and the Taylor County Sheriff's Department begins to follow Mr. Thrash. And they follow him all the way through Taylor County, all the way through Abilene. They end up initiating a stop at around mile marker 290. And if you watch the video that the Taylor County District Attorney's Office has provided, it shows the sheriff getting in between another sheriff's vehicle directly behind Mr. Thrash, and they're less than 10, 15 feet away from Mr. Thrash's vehicle. And you see the officer turn his lights off. He turns them on. He turns them back off again, and then turns them on, and then immediately initiates a stop, turns the lights on, and Mr. Thrash complies. And then as the Sheriff's Department makes contact with Mr. Thrash, they inform him of the reason of the stop, and they tell him that his license plate is not bright enough to see from 50 feet away. And at that point, they ask Mr. Thrash, they ask for his driver's license and registration, just like they would a normal stop. And Mr. Thrash is cooperative. He hands his license, hands his concealed to carry handgun license as well, which we're required to do by state law. If you have your handgun with you, you let the officer know that you have it. And he does. Well, then the officer immediately questions Mr. Thrash as to, have you ever been arrested? And to which he replies, no. And the officer said, ever been in trouble with the law ever? And Mr. Thrash says no. And then they want to know where he's going. And he tells them pretty simple story, that he's on the way to go to Bryan, Texas. He's got his partner that he's going down with as well. They're riding not in the same vehicle together, but together, heading down the same direction, and they've got different missions. Mr. Thrash is going to go get his daughter and also tow back her car. And then, of course, at that point, the officer, he takes Mr. Thrash's driver's license and goes back, says he's going to run it so he can get him back on the road. And that's not what happened. They immediately go back and they start discussing, and I say they, the officers start discussing pretty much how they're going to be able to take a look in this car. They see a duffel bag. It's been hit by the LPR, and so they don't treat it like it's just a license plate light. They're doing everything they can to basically be able to have an opportunity to get into Mr. Thrash's car with a search. And so, something that's troubling in my mind as to this type of case is you have an officer that can basically, they're using something subjective in their own opinion that light is bright enough or not. They don't use any tools to test the brightness of the light. They don't use anything. It's just the officer saying, well, it's not bright enough from 50 foot away. At that point, they asked to search Mr. Thrash's vehicle. And mind you, this as well, when the officer initiated contact with Mr. Thrash, he's at the window, and he doesn't mention at one time ever that he can smell anything in the car. Doesn't say he smells weed or anything. It's only after the gentleman that has the drug dog, he says, well, I'm going to run the drug dog around, and I'm going to see what happens. Well, he runs around. You can't really see anything. You hear the dog bark, and then he basically takes the dog to the side, puts him up, and then comes back and says, hey, my dog hit on your car. So therefore, I now have probable cause to search your vehicle. And then at that point, they start searching. Well, they don't find drugs, and at that point, you start hearing an officer who is pretty congested, coughing, probably can't really smell anything, starts saying he can smell raw marijuana. And so they're searching through his truck, and they come across a small bag, it's a Nike bag that has Mr. Thrash's money in it. And he had the sum of approximately $55,000 with him. And they automatically, at that point, once this officer sees the cash, he goes back and puts Mr. Thrash in handcuffs, who's been cooperative the entire time, puts him in cuffs and lets him know that he's going to be detained while they search. And they spend an enormous amount of time, and they start asking him, about his money. Is that your money? And yes, it is. And why do you have that much money on you? And of course, Mr. Thrash is like, is it illegal to carry money? No, it's not. But they believe in their minds that it's automatically, a black man with $55,000. Well, hell, it must be ill-gotten gain. And so they search the vehicle, and they spend quite some time. They went through everything. They went through the speaker box. They went through everything. Couldn't find it. And so they don't find any actual drugs. And then they decide they start talking about how they're scraping the money to get the residue off to have enough cocaine to be able to charge him with a state jail felony, so they can find a way really to confiscate the money. That's really, in my mind, that's what it came about. And the rest of you hear them talking about, we're getting that money. We're getting that money. And so they end up, ultimately, this is the most bizarre event, is they then inform Mr. Thrash they can't find any drugs. So they have money that they claim has residue on it, and they're talking about scraping it to have more. Well, they then tell Mr. Thrash that, hey, you're going to be charged with possession of cocaine, money laundering, and an unlawful carrying of a weapon. Because in Texas, if you have a concealed carry license and you have a firearm and they charge you with a crime or allege you committed a crime, well, then that's a new crime. And that's how you get the unlawful carrying of a weapon. And so they tell Mr. Thrash that he's good to go and go on down the road, and we're keeping all this, and you might have charges filed against you. And so no arrest, but they take his gun, his money, and basically just let him free back in the same vehicle that he was in when they stopped, and said the license plate was too dim. Well, they let him take off. And something that sticks out in my mind from even listening to the officers talk during this stop, there's a lot of things that didn't seem right. But in this one, when they said that one of the officers stated, when they said they were going to let him go, Mr. Thrash, they said he could go, and then the officer says, hopefully he won't come back for the money anyway. And so they acted as if.
Wait a minute. Excuse me.
He would just leave that money behind.
I gotta.
Because in their mind, it was still ill-gotten gain.
I gotta ask you this. They thought that Mr. Thrash was not going to come back for $55,000. And first off, can you clarify before we even go any further, where did this money come from?
Yes. So, this is one of those cases that we actually can trace the money. Mr. Thrash had it ended up getting an award on a personal injury suit, where he was awarded more than $55,000. It was a large sum, and when he cashed it, he obviously wanted to keep enough cash in his safe, and I can't say I blame him. I don't trust banks all the time, and the safest place for my money is with me. And that's exactly what Mr. Thrash did. He had kept his money with him. And if he wanted to go make a purchase, it's his money. And so when the officers, of course, asked him about it, he told them, look, that's my money. I got it from a settlement. He was straightforward with them. And they said, what are you doing with it? Not that it's any of their business, but he's like, look, I'm going down there. I'm looking at a couple of trucks. I may put some money down on a big rig. Mr. Thrash is a truck driver. He's been a truck driver for a long time. And so that's it. I mean, that's where it came from. So it's not illegally gotten. But in their mind, in the entire time, they don't ever treat Mr. Thrash anything other than treat him like a criminal. I mean, they were nice and polite in essence, but behind the scenes, not to him, that's all they talked about was that, this money's from something. He's making a drug run. We just caught him too early. They never, ever looked at Mr. Thrash as anything other than criminal the entire time that their interaction with him.
Mr. Hawkins, let me ask Mrs. Holliday one question. Ms. Holliday, you mentioned before Mr. Hawkins started talking that you vet complaints.
Yes.
Can you, if you vetted a complaint, what was the results of the vetting of Mr. Thrash as far back as the person, private detective or private investigator, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us, if you have that, the results of that vetting process and what was the conclusion? Thank you.
We've found no criminal history at all. We found nothing in his background except that he was we found nothing.
How far did you go back in this vetting process, Mrs. Holyday?
We went back as far as the system allowed us to go, as far as we could through all the records, all of his criminal, at least his adult life.
Mr. Hawkins, let me ask you a question. The information you gave us, is that based on hearsay or video C?
The information I just talked about it's all on video. I mean, I've got the officer's report that reflects a little bit differently than what the video actually shows. I mean, there was a lot of officers. There wasn't just one police officer or sheriff's officer on scene. There was quite a bit. I mean, there was at least 3 or 4 different patrol cars. I mean, it wasn't just one person pulling over. They came thinking that they were going to get a big haul, and that's what they came to the scene for. And that's why they, in my mind, everything that you see, they couldn't find another reason to pull him over. You even hear one of the officers talk about, man, we just followed trying to get PC. And then finally, the officer that pulled him over, got creative. And, you had all these sheriffs in Nolan County that couldn't find PC to pull Mr. Thrash over or any reason to do so. And so when Taylor County they were getting close because he was at mile marker 290 heading east towards the Dallas area. Well, that's not too far, 10 more miles and you're outside of Abilene or Taylor County real fast. And so the officer got creative and came up with a reason to pull him over was a license plate light. And the thing with those license plate lights, they're factory bulbs and they're bright and you can see the license plate, but it's very subjective.
Let me ask you something so our audience can know this. What is PC?
Probable cause, reason to stop.
Okay, I just got to say this. Every redneck Ku Klux Klan law officer uses PC or tries to find PC to pull a black man over. And I had to say that. So continue on, sir. I'm sorry. This is unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Oh yeah, no, and it's and something else that it happened shortly after is, of course, Taylor County file a civil seizure forfeiture claim, against Mr. Thrash, and then once we filed an
What is that? What does that mean?
That's the mechanism that the government tries to use to allege that the money that they have seized is ill-gotten gain, and that's what they do to seize it. And if they're successful, then that money gets dispersed within the sheriff's department of the department who seizes it. That money gets spread around so they can get overtime pay, new gear, different things, and that's what they do. So really, they have a personal vested interest in basically stealing a citizen's money.
How long ago did this happen? And Dr. Ashley, we put the questions together, but man, that sounds like I'm in 1925. But go ahead, sir. How long ago have they been holding Mr. Thrash's $55,000, which the police report said, how much did they seize from me?
The police report says they seized 50,000. They've managed to misplace 5,000 of it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, and then Dr. Ashley, we might have to take a quick break, but this sounds like 1925. But go ahead,
Yeah,
sir. Go ahead.
This was May of 2019, and obviously we had with the COVID pandemic and shutting courts down, we didn't do a whole lot of court the past year. But ultimately, the civil case is obviously going to follow the criminal case. That's what they're trying to do, because if they can try to get a conviction, then that helps them clear the path, if you will, to in essence take this man's money.
Can you take us back? Dr. Ashley, we got together and put some questions together. So, fire up matter of fact, let's go to a break, because I have to get some water. I got to start squeezing my stick here. I started sweating. I mean, that could have been me. That could have been, and I've carried chunks of money with me. But Dr. Ashley, can you take us to a quick sponsor break? But this is unbelievable.
It truly is. And again, want to invite our listeners to pay attention to where they're feeling it in their bodies as we listen to this, horrible, traumatic experience. So if you're feeling tension, or like Doug wants to get his stick, or maybe feeling that's not right, or find yourself frowning, or I noticed my jaw was getting tight at points of the story, that's just a way of recognizing how we respond to stress. Again, thank you, Mr. Donnie Glover of blackusa.news and bemorenews.com. We want to invite our listeners to tune in to the other wonderful shows on the network. We have Sister Biz with Nicole and Tamara on Wednesdays. We also have Black USA Crypto News with Kamal Hubbard on Fridays. If you'd like to learn more about Miss Tammy Willis, who's our sponsor and owner of Magnolia Engineering and Construction, please visit her website, www.magnoliaengineeringandconstruction.com. Magnolia Engineering and Construction would like to be part of growing with the community of Oakland, California. And you may also connect with Magnolia Engineering and Construction on all social media platforms. Let's take a deep breath.
Michael Thrash, head home, man. Oakland, California. Do like the Beverly Hillbillies did. Pack up and head back. I can't believe this. And, we got to get back into this story. For those of you who may have not been listening, we have an unbelievable story of law enforcement, or the lack of law enforcement. But Dr. Ashley and I have gotten together and put some questions together. Dr. Ashley, because like I said, I'm squeezing my stick and sweating. So can you ask the first question or two while I calm down? Because this reminds me of back in the 1800s and the 1700s, where law officers were hired by slave owners to track people down and bring them back. They tracked this brother down and took his money. And go ahead, Doc. I'm just really, really fired up about this. Go ahead, Doc.
No problem. Well, actually, we went through the questions, but I wanted to just actually pick up where we left off, which is that the claim, that the claim was for 50,000 versus 55, and just let you wait. Also, share what our commenters are saying. So our listeners are saying they must have split the money, that it was an early Christmas. Again, but just to make it plain, I will ask the last question that we have, again, regarding money. We want to make it clear. Is it illegal to carry that amount of cash?
When it's your cash, and you can transport it however you want to. However, when you hear these deputies or different sheriffs talk, they don't even know the answer. They start making claims that Mr. Thrash should have had permission and should have had a letter from someone saying that he could carry that amount of cash with him. And so it's not illegal at all, but law enforcement, and they have a history of it, of doing so is, and you don't have to worry about thieves so much. You have to worry about the crooks and law enforcement finding a reason to come up with a charge to be able to take your money. And sometimes they take your money without ever making an arrest. In this case, they didn't arrest Mr. Thrash right then and there. And I've been a defense lawyer for about 19 years. I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen someone that's been charged with cocaine, money laundering, and unlawful carrying a weapon not go to jail right then and there. They didn't. And really, it comes down to a lot of the chatter that you can hear in the background of the different officers' vest cameras and their MVRs inside their vehicle. You can hear them talking about, cut the other guy loose, the stop's questionable, and then even there's a sergeant who continuously says, no, cut him loose. He probably won't come back for the money anyway. But so they know themselves that it was in my mind, it wasn't a good stop. It doesn't. I can't see how it would be. And then even the actions of the officers at the scene. I mean, you could definitely tell it wasn't there. Like, hey, we're just gonna check you. We're gonna get you a ticket. We're gonna see your license, make sure it's good. Man, they knew what they were doing, and I'm sure they've done it numerous times. It's not the first, but I've heard a lot of stories with people that do carry money, in large volumes, 20,000, 10,000, and they will still get harassed by law enforcement, and they dare think they can to take that money, which only benefits them in the first place. So they really have, it's almost as if they have it's almost like it's a conflict of interest, because in essence, they're the ones bringing forth the charges to try to get your money, and that money is going to go directly to them. And so the system definitely is broken in that regard. But at the same time, I don't think law enforcement should be able to take your money from you at all. Even if they say there's trace amounts of anything on the money and they're going to scrape it off to make a case, I mean, in my mind, that screams foul.
Mr. Hawkins, in all due respect, I had to validate and verify. So I called the Taylor County Sheriff's Office on Wednesday, September 29th, and spoke to Caitlin Culpepper, administration, Carla, and another young lady by the name of Carla. And I explained to them that we were having you on the show, and would they be interested in giving their side of the story. They immediately said, we can't, we have to turn you over to Sergeant Cliff Griffin. He was in charge of, or he is in charge of media for the Taylor County Sheriff's Department. When they put Sergeant Griffin on the phone, and I explained to him, my name is Doug Blackshear, and I'm the host of the Black Business Roundtable, and I'm calling to find out where Mr. Thrash's $55,000 is. He started heeing and hawing and said he would get back to me. The next day, I think Caitlin Culpepper called me back. I'm sure it was Caitlin Culpepper. That's what I have in my notes here. And she said, we don't have a Mick Bash. I said, excuse me, ma'am. I said, Michael Thrash. I didn't say Mick Bash. I said, Michael Thrash. So within 30 seconds, she says, sir, she starts stuttering like she had a speech impediment. Before that, she was clear as a bell. She said, sir, we can't discuss a narcotics case that's pending right now. I said, ma'am, this has been pending for 2.5 years. She said, sir, we can't discuss it. I said, okay, well, we're going to air this Thursday, October 14th, 4 p.m. Pacific Coast, 6 p.m. your time, and 7 p.m. East Coast time. So they've had and they have a chance to get on this station, to get on this podcast and explain why those law officers took $55,000 in cash. And I'll let you say the rest, Mr. Because I let me just say this, Michael, because I've been knowing you over 45 years. I wouldn't have believed it if it was true, knowing I know you. So Anyway, Mr. Hawkins, can you tell us a little more about this, especially in regards to when Mr. Thrash failed, or I won't say failed. Now, I'm going to give you credit, Mr. Thrash. You're from Oakland. You like me. I battled some of the biggest companies and made them bow down to their knees. So if you come from Oakland, you are a fighter, and you keep fighting, my brother. So can you tell us a little bit about this case, Mr. Hawkins, as it relates to once they let this man go who was supposed to be laundering money, selling cocaine, and had a dim light as a PC, while they let him go, and then what happened after that when they came to his house and he had to get a bail bondsman? Can you elaborate on that, sir? Thank you.
Yes, after he was let go, he went on with his business, and then it was a short time later that he was served with the civil forfeiture lawsuit. They informed him that, hey, we're alleging that the money you have is ill-gotten. We want it, and if you default, they get it. And so we filed an answer on Mr. Thrash's behalf, saying, hey, we're not going away. We're here. And so at that point, we started the discovery process on the civil side of things. And then as soon as, I don't know how many days after I filed the answer on the civil suit, but it didn't take long for them then to all of a sudden come down with indictments to then come arrest Mr. Thrash. And of course, the bond was set, in my mind, excessively high. I think the bond, if I remember correctly, was like $50,000 bond on, we're talking a trace where they had to scrape the bills to get the cash, get the cocaine residue off the bills. And they set his bond at $50,000, if I'm not mistaken. And so he had to actually go do a book and release and spend money on, obviously on a bonding company. And then, obviously he's had to then retain counsel to, basically fight a dual fight, one for the criminal side of things, and then also for the civil side of things, to try to get this man's money back to him, that it's rightfully his. And the sad thing is we have proof. We've shown the state the proof. We've shown them that, that look, this man has money in his bank account. This man who was at the time he was stopped was 57 or 58-year-old black man who's never been in trouble a day in his life. He has a concealed carry license, which also shows that he's a trusted citizen, because you don't get those unless you meet certain criteria, and it's hard. And so for Mr. Thrash to have all of these positive things and to show proof that he has the settlement, proof what he was doing, with where he was going, proof from the gentleman he was going to go look at a truck from. We have that man's affidavit as well, and still cannot get the state to look at it any differently. They want to prosecute the criminal side, and if they can get that conviction, to them it's worth $55,000.
Let me ask you something, sir.
Yes, sir.
What is Mr. Thrash's occupation over the last 30, 40 plus years, sir, please?
I know he worked for Montford TDCJ for a short period of time, and then he's been a truck driver. And I'm not sure if he's done other activities, but he's definitely been a truck driver, and gainfully employed, supports his family, and makes pretty decent money at it. So this isn't somebody that had no bank account. This gentleman had a good chunk of money in his bank account, even at the time of this stop, and we have all that as proof as well. So he's gotten his money from legitimate means. He's not involved in any illegal activities. He's, and the sad thing too is, like, he answered the officers' questions, and they did everything they could do to try to say what they were confused. Oh, well, his story doesn't make sense. How could he be traveling along with someone else, not in the same vehicle? What, they're going the same direction? They're both going to Bryan, but they're going to do different things. That just doesn't make sense. And that was their whole thing, to try to get him further. They thought they were going to twist his story. Well, his story stayed true because it was the truth. And but they did everything they could to shed him in a negative light. Just the stuff they talk, throughout the stop. You can definitely tell the tone, and you can definitely tell that they want to do everything they could to keep that money.
Dr. Ashley, I gotta ask you this, and you know where I'm going. So I'm gonna grab my stick before I even ask you. What is the psychological effect of this man, 58 years old, worked 40 plus years, saved his money, and I believe, and if I'm wrong, you were a correctional officer for 3 years also? And that was a vetting process. So you don't have, and Dr. Ashley, help us, because I'm sure, Mr. Thrash, Michael, you're not the only one out here, brother. But we're going to make sure we shine enough light on this to where people are going to have to start coming up with some real answers here. Dr. Ashley, what is the psychological effect? And we talked about this man. This is the man. Because if somebody took $55,000 from me, family or friend, I'd be pretty upset. So what is the psychological effect that not only he is enduring, but his family? Thank you.
No, thank you. And Michael Thrash, one, we're happy that you're still here. And I know that the legal proceedings are continuing on, so that you're limited and what you can share. Want to hear from you. But I just humbly say, first of all, to be stopped is startling, right? So just even hearing sirens, even when we're not being stopped by the police, but it can be an ambulance, it's just very startling. And then understanding the climate of the country and where we live, and that, as Mr. Harris pointed out, usually the goal is surviving the moment. I want to get out of this alive. I want to be able to go home to my family. So the natural hyperactivity that we feel, heart racing, is like, okay, calm down. And based on the story, what I understood is that Mr. Thrash was very controlled under pressure. So I'm going to use sports because that's just what I do, but it's about being clutch and being methodical and making sure identification was shown, making sure the concealed license to carry was shown, alerting everything in a systematic way. That takes a lot of control and management of emotions. In addition to that, however, though, injustice is infuriating. When something happens to us that we don't deserve, and then someone prides themselves on trying to dismantle reputation, livelihood, and freedom for a Black man that's been intentional in surviving life in Oakland, California, thriving, getting to his mid to late 50s, for this to happen? As Mr. Hawkins outlined his client's credibility, the character, and then you're fighting an institution's entitlement. And then coming from, let's just be honest, as adults, no one likes to be lied to. And then it's like, and then you lose, as you mentioned, $5,000 of my money, hard earned. You're talking about, it's understandable being shortchanged, targeted, injustice. There's so many ways to react. But I can tell Mr. Thrash's character, because he's going about it again systematically, involving his attorney, consulting Ms. Holiday and other resources. And so here we go again. He's fighting it the right way. But even when we do things the right way, even when we respond the right way, we can't control other people. More importantly, even in our patience to wait for victory that can be coming, it still takes an emotional toll.
Mrs. Holyday, let's discuss Black men. And from our brief conversations, you've been around the country and you've talked and you work with the NAACP and the other organization. What, in your best judgment, as a representative, just as a person, as a Black woman, seeing this Black man who and I remember you saying the investigator was a police investigator, finding out that this man had not as much as a parking ticket. What was your thoughts on that, ma'am?
Well, I am a person who looks for statistics. So I immediately went to the statistics, and I found that 30%, there's a 30% likelihood of a Black person being stopped without just cause than a white person. 65% of Black adults have felt targeted because of their race. Black people are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of whites, and Black men are 5 times more likely to be stopped without just cause than a white person. So the reason that I do what I do for the NAACP is because of people like Mr. Thrash. We want to see people who are on the right side of the law get justice. And that's why the NAACP is here. That's why we do what we do. And if we can do that for one person out of those 5, then we've accomplished something.
Thank you, Mrs. Holyday. Mr. Robert L. Harris, Esquire, who I remember was a civil rights warrior, challenged all kind of unethicalness. If you have an opinion, can you share it with our audience, as you have seen many types in your
Well, this is a situation that clearly illustrates the danger of driving while black. And that's his only crime, it seems to me. And I'm happy to see that he has counsel, Mr. Barnes, I believe it's Barnes. And that's so important. And further, that it's important that Mr. Thrasher did everything that should be done. It's sort of like a model that you you really do have to cooperate, because had he made one wrong move, they would probably shot him and killed him. So, and then he would have never been able to come back, hire Mr. Barnes, a lawyer who will probably be successful, hopefully, in remedying this despicable situation. I act as general counsel to the Oakland branch of the NAACP, and I have defended the NAACP in a number of cases. One where the cops really went out of their way to sue the NAACP for defamation when the NAACP complained about police misconduct. Of course, we ultimately won that case, but it's so important to do like Mr. Thrasher did here. And I encourage all of our listeners to take a page from the book of Mr. Thrasher and learn that, because, again, he has lived to fight another day.
Mr. Harris, aka Uncle Robert, this is Mr. Matthew Hawkins. So we get his name correct, Mr.
Okay, Mr. Hawkins.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And I know a lot of lawyers down in Texas from my dealings with the National Bar Association.
Mr. Hawkins, we have 28 minutes left. I want you to fill in at least 20 of those minutes with detail of how you told me through our numerous conversations, and it's only been 2 or 3, but to me, knowing Michael Thrash, you could have sent me a message on a pigeon, and I would have believed it. But can you tell us how you have never, in your career of 19 years of being a lawyer down there in Texas, you need to move up to California, Michael Thrash, but once you get your money back, think about it. You have never seen any brother who has a impeccable, and Michael Thrash, don't let your head get too big, but impeccable reputation, and these bullies, scoundrel policemen have tried to destroy what this man has carefully built in over 40 years. Thank you, sir.
I'm missing something. He's not filling me in.
My phone, I had the mute button on you. So can you start where I left off?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're fine. Yeah, and I was saying when I first had the opportunity to meet Michael, he told me kind of what we talked about today, and really I was like, there's no way, there's no way. I mean, he's not telling me something. I mean, I've been doing criminal defense a long time, and you'd be surprised how many times your clients really won't fully disclose what you need to know. And you sometimes go to court and you get bit because, well, they didn't want to tell you because they were embarrassed for whatever reason. And so when, I interviewed Mr. Thrasher. I was like, there's got to be more. And man, I got his background. I was like, so you've never been in trouble? No. I mean, I've got a concealed carry license. I've not been in trouble. And in my mind, when you have a concealed carry license in Texas, I mean, you've been vetted, you've been looked at, and I mean, they don't just give them to everybody. And if you do get one by mistake, it's not long. They usually catch you. But Mr. Thrash had that, and he's like, man, I've never been in trouble. He told me about his history, about his work history, and then told me about the events of course, at the time he did not know that a license plate reader was used to try to identify the vehicle he was in. And so, in our, apparently, and I know at least in Texas, you can be arrested and that case can be dismissed, but law enforcement still carries that name forward and puts that person in the system, wherever that is. And so however the license plate reader company is tied into it, I mean, that was how it got started, was a license plate reader. But and the license plate reader gives information about who the owner of the vehicle is, and they could easily tell it was a female that owned the vehicle. And so when they got to Mr. Thrash and they followed him for a good long time, I mean, they knew they were not dealing with a female. They knew they were dealing with a black man, and they continued to follow and could not find a reason to pull him over. Well, they did, and they found a reason. But yes, and then so when Mr. Thrash, you could tell law enforcement's surprised when he told them that, you ever been in trouble? No, never been arrested. You could tell the surprise in their voices. That's impossible. There's no way this black man has never been arrested or in trouble, is what it seems like. And so he's like, no, here's my concealed carry, here's my license. He's got a great reputation. Everybody I've met with and talked to, and I've talked to different people that know him, man, they all say the same thing, that his character is gold. He's always been done right, stays right, and does right. And even through, this whole process of the legal process we're in, I've gotten to know Michael even better. We've gone through his case, we've gone through discovery, and his reputation is good, and it's just tragic event that these officers automatically took him for a drug dealer because he happened to be borrowing someone's vehicle that was trying to be nice so he could actually be able to tow his daughter's car back. And so he was still doing right by his own daughter, but they still treated him like a criminal the entire time and just knew that he was a drug runner, that he hauls tons of stuff. I mean, they were looking at tool markings on the doors, which you can tell that there's aftermarket speakers installed in this car. And if anybody's ever installed those, you can you mark up a car, but they automatically assume that he was hauling large amounts of dope, and they didn't find it. And so that's okay. We'll scrape off these bills enough, and then when they get back to the department, oh hey, besides scraping the bills, we found some more powder. Well, I'm sure they did. But yeah, Mr. Trash's reputation is good, and it's just a shame that they treat him the way they treated him.
Well, let me tell you this, Mr. Thrash. Let me tell you this, Mr. Hawkins. Not only does the Taylor County is put on notice, the state of Texas, and I hope and pray that the audience from East Coast, New York, Virginia, New Jersey, all the way across past Chicago, Chi-Town, past Texas, of course, we got to pass Texas up now, all the way to California. Start making calls down there, finding out what the heck is going on. We have a bunch of Keystone cops down there, and from what it sounds like, this is not the first time that this has happened. You cannot take $55,000 cash, take a man's gun, and say he's a drug dealer, but let him drive off. What kind of policing is going on down there in Texas? This needs to be under some kind of investigation. Mr. Harris, do you have any, can you chime in? Because I'm not a lawyer, and the words I have to say are not going to be godly. So I want to let the legal scholars help me out here before I get ugly.
Well, first, let me apologize to Mr. Hawkins for getting his name wrong. But, this is, I think he's doing an excellent job of what he should do in terms of representing Mr. Thrash. But at some point, he may want to consider talking to the Civil Rights Department of the United States Justice Department. I'm certain that's probably in his bag of tools eventually to do so, because this kind of behavior is really not acceptable in 2021. So I place full confidence in the ability of Mr. Hawkins to pursue this to whatever the appropriate ends may be.
Mrs. Holyday, can you chime in? We're working with 20 minutes, or actually 10 minutes, 13 minutes left. What would you suggest Mr. Thrash do? And let me tell you something, Mike, because I know you, Michael. So, Mike, I commend you, man.
Thank you.
I probably would have got shot. I would have watched the police put the money in. I don't know how you kept cool, but let me tell you something, brother. Mr. Harris, Uncle Robert, he eloquently stated you were smart and you lived to fight another day. Mrs. Holyday, can you chime in before we close out? What can the NAACP do down there with these rogue police, either police officers, rank and file officers, sheriffs, county, or even the state? What is going on down there in Texas, and how do we handle it?
So you saved the toughest question for me, huh? Basically, we have to pull out everything in our toolbox, direct action. It starts there. So we'll determine what that direct action will be, and we'll basically go from there. Once we determine what that direct action will be, our state conference, our state NAACP has been notified. They are aware. I got permission to be on your show from them, so they are aware. Being as the Taylor County was involved, I also contacted Abilene NAACP and got their permission to represent them as well. So they are also involved. And I'm sure we will all be getting together to decide what that direct action will be.
Mrs. Holyday, thank you. And we got in touch with you on a last minute notice, and we appreciate you talking to Mr. Michael Thrash, Mike. And once again, it's tragic in 2021 that we can have something this horrific happen to a law-abiding Black man. Now, you don't even have to be law-abiding, just a human.
I would like to say, though, to the audience, if you do run into something like this, don't wait to get in touch with someone who can help you. Reach out. when it happens. The earlier people get involved and the earlier people it's brought to people's attention, the easier it is to shine a light and make it better for others. So the sooner you know about it, reach out to the NAACP, to the EEOC, whatever agency, but reach out to the NAACP. If you don't reach anywhere else, reach out to us and we'll be happy to help.
Thank you, Mrs. Holyday. And I just want to go back up to Michael. Mike, when you called me, what did and that was almost, 10 days ago, 12? What did I tell you to do, man?
The first thing you told me to do is contact the NAACP.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, now, we've talked about this, and this is not, because, I know you're under doctor's care now, so I'm going to be very careful of how I ask the next question. How are you doing mentally, my brother? Because this has got to be devastating. 2.5 years. I mean, $55,000. Look at the interest you could have made. And down in Texas, that's like $155,000. So how are you doing mentally, my brother?
I mean, it's rough. I have good and bad days, but it's the whole thing started off, it just made me feel less than human. For me to go this long in my life, never to be in any trouble, and to be treated like that. And then to be treated like that twice, first on the side of the road, and then for you to come back over 90 days later to arrest me, it's not a good feeling. It's just,
where did they arrest you at?
At my home. They came like, looked like SWAT came to my house, and then the embarrassment that I had to go through with my neighbors and just everything. It's not a good feeling, and I don't wish this on anyone.
Mr. Hawkins, wait a minute, Dr. Ashley, please. I know, Mr. Thrash, Michael, you can't really talk because you're under medical care right now, but Dr. Ashley, for those brothers, two things, who find themselves in a situation, and I can guarantee you that it's happening all across this country. What kind of psychological advice can you give them to maintain as you see someone steal $55,000? What can you say that will keep them from getting killed? Thank you.
I think, first of all, again, Mr. Thrash, I'm so happy to hear that you're under medical care. And I think it's reaching out and getting support. It's gut-wrenching to hear you talk about, just in those moments, the dehumanization you face, the embarrassment. I'm sure having to explain that to your children, what that meant. And then, of course, as people of the African diaspora who didn't have a choice, our ancestors didn't have a choice about whether or not to be in chains. I can imagine not having a criminal history is a source of pride, not having ever been arrested, yes. Being a correctional officer, so potentially a sense of betrayal regarding having contributed to that which now is hurting you. But I think even more so, if someone encounters this, seeking help and seeking support, right? Not isolating, knowing that at therapy, we're bound by confidentiality. We're not going to judge you. And as you continue to hear all of us validate what, the horrors of what you experienced, how terrifying it is, to hear Mr. Harris also validate, as another Black man, you survived. So you picked the right choice. You're not less than, you picked the right choice, thinking about yourself and your family. But it is a ball of emotions naturally. That's normal process. And you deserve support. And anyone who encounters trauma, wherever they find it, deserves support. And it takes a village. This is what the village looks like, right? Legal representation, supports and allies, NAACP or other community supports, loved ones, medical care, psychological care. And if you need support in accessing those resources, reach out and do so. But you have survived, and I'm really hoping that you receive the victory that you deserve. And let me also say something else, Mr. Thrash, as I see you here with your emotion. I'm glad you're letting it out. Let me explain something again that some of us hold it in. Let me talk to the sisters and just women in general. Many of us hold it in and cry in the shower. The shower is usually the place where a lot of women let it go. Ms. Holiday, I see you nodding. You understand? And we need to humanize men. So you being able to let it out right now means a lot because you're honoring your humanity. We see your humanity, and our listeners and viewers need to see this as well. This is also what strength looks like.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Ashley, once again, well said.
Thank you.
Michael Thrash, thank you, brother. And
Appreciate you, guys.
Mr. Matthew Hawkins.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
I have the utmost respect from the first time I spoke to you. And as you see, if your communication device doesn't work, we'll fix it anyway to make sure that our audience hears what you have to say. So can you wrap it up in 5 minutes or less, where you're going from here to get this man justice? And we want you both to come back on this show because we want our audience to know the Black Business Roundtable is all about business, but you can't do business if you're dead or you're shot or you're framed like the law enforcement appears to be doing down there with you, because they could have threw you in jail. And this is just gut-wrenching. And I'm going to let you talk. I'm gonna walk away because Michael Thrash, 30 years ago, we'd have brought East Oakland down to Texas and handled that. But we're mature adults now, and you made the right, and I'm proud of you, my brother. Mr. Hawkins, please take it away, sir.
Yes. So our it's on paper. Not saying it's really going to go, but it's set for sometime in January. But our goal is to actually have an actual suppression hearing to see if we can get the stop suppressed. I think it's a bad stop, and I think how they got there and their actions led to that. So we're hoping that we can get this case, get it suppressed, and then after we get it suppressed, then our next case, our next battle will then obviously be in the civil court to basically prove that the money was from a legal and lawful manner and not ill-gotten gain, and that they should return this money back to its rightful owner, which is Mr. Thrash. And so that's our goal with his case. And like I said, I believe in Mr. Thrash, and I believe his innocence, and I'm hoping that we will be successful in showing that and getting him exonerated, because I would like to get all that dismissed. I'd like to expunge all of those cases where he has a clean record again, and get him his money back. And that's our goal. And I think that with what we have, with the evidence we have, and what's out there, I think that we can be successful.
Well, audience, I don't know about you, but I've had a full day. And Michael, let me tell you something, brother. Cry. Because you a bigger man than I'm not saying that I would have done something different, but it takes a big man to do what you did. We could be talking, you could be dead right now. And we just lost a brother who we grew up with.
Yes.
So to that end, Dr. Ashley, can you do a 2-minute sponsor break and thanking Donnie Glover, and I'm gonna wrap it up because I'm about to go in tears just listening to this. And audience, you be sure to call down. What county is that, Mr. Hawkins?
Taylor County.
And what can our audience do to help this man get justice from a law enforcement? And let me clear one thing up, Mr. Thrash. What color were the officers who arrested you?
White.
How many were they?
I believe of four or five. I'm not sure that it's in a fog, but I know it's at least four of them.
And they were all
white.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Ashley, and I'll close it out.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Mr. Donnie Glover of blackusa.news and bemorenews.com. Want to invite our listeners to tune in to Mr. Glover's YouTube page, where you can find the Donnie Glover YouTube page for more information, insights, and rebroadcasts of the streaming shows. Again, thank you, Magnolia Engineering and Construction, whose mission is to become the premier building and engineering resource for large-scale commercial and transportation building projects in the Bay Area and beyond. Again, the vision is to enhance the presence of Black women in the construction and engineering industry through key partnerships and building contracts in the municipal, government, and transportation sectors. Doug, I know you're going to close this out, but I want to give a special thank you to all of our guests. And additionally, Mr. Hawkins, thank you too for, being transparent about how radical the story was when you first met Mr. Thrash, and also just being willing to step in and support. And we know that, put on my psychologist hat, but bystander effect, it takes multiple people to stand up for justice to see change. So thank you for your efforts. Doug, it's my favorite time to tell you, as your teammate, as your running back to your quarterback.
Girl, if I'd have you, it wouldn't be a show.
It's okay. It's okay.
Thank you to our weekly special guest and my ride or die co-host, Dr. Ashley Coleman, Doctor of Psychology. Our grassroots human rights, Janani Ramachandran. She couldn't be here today, but we are hoping that she's doing well. Whatever she's doing today, I'm sure it's something important. Thank you to all of our guests, which would include Mr. Robert L. Harris, a.k.a. Uncle Robert. Thanks, huh? Always a pleasure seeing you and having your perspective on this show, especially in something like this, considering you are a respected civil rights and human rights and corporation rights and any other right lawyer in this country. I'd like to thank Mrs. Jessica Holliday. We support you, and I am a lifetime member of the NAACP. And if and when I come down, I'm going to let you know so y'all can put a radar on me, because they'll probably be looking for me when I get through with them. Mr. Matthew Hawkins, I got you still on the phone here, sir, so if you can't talk, I'm just going to say this. I've always said there's good and bad people in every race, and you exemplify the good people in all races. Thank you, sir. We appreciate you and what you're doing for Michael Thrash. And I can assure you, Mr. Hawkins, we will not go quietly into the night. And you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, sir, I do. Yes, sir, I do.
The cavalry is on its way. I see John Petit's on the phone, and we got many other Kingster Lions, and that's what our motto, we were Lions, King Lion. So, Michael Thrash, the cavalry.
Time for